work at an organisation that made grant funding. 18 months ago, I was sitting in a conference room in New Plymouth listening to a woman talking about child poverty. She was talking about growing inequalities, poor health outcomes, increasing housing issues. Sitting in the room with me was a bunch of funders who together put millions of dollars into programs to address these very issues. Yet, despite their collective best endeavours, it seemed that things were getting worse. I started to wonder about funding and whether the grant-making machine does make a difference to our community. At the time I started looking at this, there was no overall information about grant-making in Canterbury. But I'm a bit of a data geek, so I figured I'd have a crack at it. For the last 6 months, I've been trawling the internet, looking at PDFs and spreadsheets for information on non-earthquake-related Canterbury grants made by organisations where individuals and entities can ask for funding. I've been quite surprised by what I've found about the philanthropic landscape, and I think that as a community, we need to have a conversation about where the money comes from, where it goes, how it gets there. The most important thing I've learned is this: I feel our philanthropic ecosystem's out of balance, and we as a community need to talk. For 2014, Canterbury organisations received around $65 million in grants. If we assume that Canterbury is largely representative of the rest of New Zealand, we can say that New Zealand organisations received around $700 million from these sorts of funders. What's really interesting, the gaming trusts. Now, gamblers get back most of what they put into the machine. But research by New Zealand's Health Sponsorship Council tells us that 1 in 10 Kiwis know of a family member who is unable to deliver the basics because of gambling. As a society, we deal with this in 2 ways. Firstly, the gaming trusts do pay a levy that goes to fund some gambling support services. Secondly, we as a society use both taxpayer and philanthropic money to fund some of those downstream supports, such as domestic violence and hungry kids. A $10,000 gaming grant requires at least $200,000 going into the machine. Is that okay? May seem like a really obvious question, but what happens to the organisations that are currently reliant on that funding if we as a society decides that's not okay? So let's have a look at where the money comes from, goes to. Sport gets the largest piece of the pie, with around 1/3 of the money going into that space. About 15% goes into community, followed by arts and social services. Now, I'm going to feel like a bit of a heretic here, but the sports slice, is that too much? Or is it not enough? Last year, Rugby Union in Canterbury got $3.5 million from Canterbury funders. This equates to around $240 per registered player. Golf received a cool $750,000. The first female-dominant sport to receive funding, netball, sits at number 11 on our list, receiving $476,000. Now, my kids love their sport, and we're members of several different clubs. And I know sport can build some great skills, but so can an education. I'm doing a little bit of work with a marvellous organisation called the Champion Centre. They work with infants and preschoolers who've got a number of disabilities. Recently, one of their graduates, a little girl with Down syndrome, started school. The school was totally surprised to find she was able to read. Yet it's results like this the Champion Centre is able to get through their intensive process. A process to help those kids reach their potential that costs Philanthropy around $5,000 per child per annum. And yet, the Champion Centre is slugging it out with rowing teams and golf clubs for funding. Let's have a look at how the money gets there. Last year, 1,900 different organisations received funding in Canterbury. Around half of those received funding from multiple organisations. Their applications were largely the same, and someone in each of those 18 organisations had to read the information. US research suggests that it costs around 20 cents in the dollar for a not-for-profit to get money. And my own work tells me that it costs grant makers around 17 cents in the dollar to get a dollar out the door. If we look at the figure from before, $700 million to community groups in New Zealand, that means that that process is costing us $140 million for organisations to get funds, leaving them with just $560 million to get on and do their job. The $120 million that the organisations spend, the grant makers spend, is on top of that. We need to talk about both efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is about making sure that the money gets to those organisations at a reasonable cost. We can use efficiency through things like collaboration. Funders could collaborate on a shared application and assessment process. Not-for-profits could collaborate by talking with each other and not constantly reinventing the wheel. Effectiveness is about making sure the money goes to those organisations who can do the most good in their community with that money. It's about measuring the outputs, not the busyness of the organisation. A 20% cost saving in this value flow equates to $52 million for New Zealand organisations. If we can make the process more efficient, we can give more money to more effective organisations. The people I know who work in philanthropy and not-for-profits are some of the nicest, well-meaning and sincere people I know. They're certainly not in it for the money. This talk is not about blaming them for what's happening here. Rather, our society has created this ecosystem over the past 30 years, and people have naturally responded to that. In both asking for and giving money, we are making decisions in isolation, without thinking through the unintended consequences of those decisions. I've generated this data because I believe that if we want to get the philanthropic ecosystem back into balance, the first thing we need to do is understand it, where the money comes from, where it goes, and how it gets there. If we can use this information as a tool to encourage our community to have a greater conversation about philanthropy, we'll have the tools we need to take many steps forward. Thank you.